The music industry is absolutely brutal when it comes to competition for income. Music performance as a career path is essentially choosing your financial life on hard mode. I wish every performing artist could make enough money to help rig the Super Bowl. Just kidding. I'm just a salty Bills fan. But that is just not the reality. Here's a little secret in case you didn't already know. Your average performing musician does not make much money, regardless of the genre. Most rock bands lose money on tours, and orchestral players live just above the poverty line. Obviously, there are some exceptions, and I hope one day you become one of those exceptions, but that is the vast minority. This is even more true if you are a freelancer, or somebody that makes most of their money through contracted work that is not steady. Musicians have to be incredibly smart with their money in order to make ends meet. So here's a few tips that will help you stay on top of this. And if you stick around to the end, I've got a free template for you that can help you decide which gigs are actually worth your time. The first tip is you must understand your tax situation. Something that I find incredibly shocking is the lack of education about this kind of thing in music schools. Maybe it's changed since I was there, but I got zero education on any of this. And I have a music performance degree. You would think that this would be an essential class. Now, I'm not a licensed tax expert by any means, but I have learned the basics, mostly by trial and error and through watching other people make mistakes. You need to understand the difference between a W-2 employee and an independent contractor when it comes to taxes. W-2 is what most people are. They're considered an employee of the company they work for, which comes with all kinds of benefits, and conveniently, they take your taxes out of your paycheck for you every week. At the end of the year, you might get a little back, you might owe a little, but your taxes are more or less covered for the year. When you are a 1099 or an independent contractor, taxes are not usually taken out of your paychecks. This means that you have to pay those taxes at the end of the year when it comes time to file. Now, there may be things that you can do to mitigate some of this, such as write-offs, but that's where a tax expert would come in. But if you're not prepared for this, you can get absolutely screwed at the end of the year. You could end up owing thousands of dollars that you were not expecting. And I've heard stories of this happening, people getting audited and then ended up owing the IRS thousands of dollars. What you need to do is determine how much you owe in taxes on each one of your paychecks. Take a look at nerdwallet.com to get an idea of your tax bracket and your tax percentage, and don't forget to add both state and federal income taxes. So for example, I'm not married and I fall into the 12% federal income tax level, and I live in Colorado, which has a 4.4% tax income. This means that I need to be sure that I save 17% of my 1099 wages to make sure that I'm prepared at the beginning of next year. Sometimes things are not reported or are paid under the table, which can be helpful, but there's always a risk of audit. So again, you should consult a tax professional. If you work across multiple states, this can become even more difficult. Consult an expert at least once so that you have an idea of what to do for the next year. The next tip is have an emergency fund and a savings account. I'm harnessing my inner Caleb Hammer here, if you've seen his financial audit show. Establish how much money it would take for you to survive without any money for a month, and make sure you have at least that in a savings account. More is better. And then take a little piece from each check and throw it into this account to build up this nest egg. Gigs come and go so quickly. One month you feel rich and feel like you're swimming in them, and the next month you can go bone dry. Or even worse, you could get sick or injured and be unable to play. Having this nest egg could save you from financial ruin. The next tip is to build a budget. When you're freelancing especially, your income can vary a ton from month to month. Take your last 6 months of work and average out all of your earnings over that time to give yourself a rough idea of how much you're making on average. When you're first starting out and you don't have savings, it would be best to budget for your lowest possible month. Once you have some savings built up, budget for an average month after that. This way, there's always a safety net for yourself. There are several ways to budget once you have some backup money saved. The zero-sum budget, the 50-30-20 budget, and the envelope method all work. Just pick one and stick to it. You need to be smarter with your money than someone that has a full-time steady paycheck, because anything can happen. The next tip I have is establish multiple income sources. Unless you are playing in a full-time IXAM orchestra or playing with the backup band for Taylor Swift, it is highly doubtful that any one of the orchestras will pay you enough each month to pay all of your bills, which means you are going to need several different income sources. The most common way to do this for freelancers is to sub out to gigs that you don't have contracts for and to teach. You can make really good money subbing out, but smaller orchestras can be unpredictable. And even if you do have a contract, you should know that nothing is really guaranteed. Remember COVID? If you are subbing, you never know when that work is coming. Subbing for me seems to be feast or famine. Teaching is an excellent way to mitigate some of the risks and get a more steady income. You can make really good money if you get enough students. Obviously, some instruments will have an easier time doing this than others. Violinists and pianists will have an easier time finding students than tubists and timpanists. There are just more students out there for the former. I would also recommend getting a day job, at least in the beginning. Something part-time with flexible hours is the dream. I've worked in the restaurant industry for the last decade. The work is not fun. It can be quite grueling. But the schedule is flexible, and that part has always served me well. I also do some admin work for the orchestras that I play for. Another thing that I would consider is non-traditional forms of income, such as social media income. This stuff can often take a long time to build up, but if you manage to get a decent following, you can make some extra money off of it. And then there's other gig work you can do, such as Uber or DoorDash. I know several people that are full-time freelancers that supplement their income with Uber. My next tip is to invest in instrument insurance. This is very beneficial and can potentially save you from a disaster. If your income depends on your instrument, I would argue that this is just as important as car insurance or health insurance. My instrument and my bow are worth more than my car. Insurance is a way to protect my investment. If my instrument was to become destroyed and I didn't have insurance, that would probably mean the end of my career. I use Clarion Insurance, but there are several different companies you can use. Just do your due diligence when it comes to the policy. Thankfully, it's a whole lot cheaper than car insurance. The next tip I have is to limit debt. This is a really hard one for musicians. Most of us have student loans. If I could go back in time, I would have taken the attitude of full scholarship or I'm not going here. But unfortunately, I can't. If you're currently in music school or still in high school, do every single thing you can to get money to study. I would say getting a scholarship is one of the most important things you can do if you're considering going to music school or considering doing this for a career. The risk and reward ratio is just not worth it. Unless you are so good that you can win a full-time audition right out of school, which is exceedingly rare, you're going to be in dire financial straits. And the more money you borrow, the more difficult this is going to be for you. If you are already out of school and stuck with debt, such as me, don't make it worse with credit cards and an overly expensive instrument and a fancy new car. One credit card for emergency situations, a decent used car, and a high quality but affordable instrument is the best way to go. And the last tip that I have for you is be thoughtful about the gigs that you accept. Over the course of your career, you'll get lots of good gigs and you will get lots of bad gigs. In the beginning, it can be tempting to take everything that you can get. And this may be a good strategy to get your name out there. Just realize that the juice is not always worth the squeeze. Calculating your mileage, gas prices, and how long it takes to get to and from the gig, as well as how much work it will take to prepare the material, is always a good idea if you're trying to decide between gigs. I've designed a quick way of doing this in Excel, which I've included in the description for free. Let's go through a couple of examples together. So this is a template that I set up in Excel to help calculate whether or not the gig is actually worth your time to take. I set it up so that it'll do a lot of the calculations for you. You just have to put in your information. So we're going to go through an example of a bad gig, an okay gig, and a good gig. So the first thing that we have here is pay per service. So this is just the amount that you get paid per the service you go to. So for a bad gig, we'd say maybe $50 a service. We'd say a total of 5 services. So then your gross pay will be calculated automatically. Input whether or not this is a 1099, more than likely it is. And then input your tax percentage. That's your federal percentage plus your state percentage. Like I said earlier, go to NerdWallet to help you figure this out. But for me, this is roughly 17%, and you got to put that in as a decimal. Then you'll get your total taxes. And then your net pay will be automatically calculated. So my net pay here is 207. Then you want to input the miles driven. So let's say that this gig is 50 miles away. Okay? So that's 50 miles there, 50 miles back, 5 times. So that's 500 miles driven. Then you put in the fuel efficiency roughly of your car. So for me, I get about 30 miles to the gallon, and it'll tell me my number of gallons. Then you want to put in the average gas price of your region, which for me, I think is like $2.70. So my gas expense comes out and it's $45. So the pay after my expenses, after my gas expenses, is $162.50. Okay, then if you want, you can input the number of rehearsal hours. Let's say these are 5 3-hour services, and it'll give you your net pay per hour, which for this gig would be $10.83 an hour. Let's take a look at a slightly better gig. So let's say we have $100 per service, 5 services. Same taxes. Net pay is $415. Let's say that this gig is 20 miles away. So 20 miles there, 20 miles back, that's 40 miles a day times 5, that's 200. Same fuel efficiency. Same gas price. Same rehearsal hours. So for this gig, my gas expense is $18. So my pay after gas is $397. And I have the same amount of rehearsal hours. So in this case, I'm getting paid $26.50 an hour. Now let's look at a good gig. $150 per service, 5 services. All of this the same. Now let's say this gig is only 10 miles away. So that's 10 miles there, 10 miles back, that's 20 times 5, so that's 100 miles driven. Same fuel efficiency. Same price per gallon. Same number of rehearsal hours. So for this gig, I'm getting paid $41 an hour. So as you can see, I would say that the 2 biggest factors that make a difference is obviously your pay per service and then how far you have to drive for these gigs. And these are all pretty close to gigs that I've actually gotten before. So you can see how much that this can vary. What this doesn't take into account is the amount of time you spend in the car, as well as the amount of time you spend practicing. If you really want to depress yourself, you can go ahead and add that in too, and maybe you'll get paid $5 an hour. But I've designed this to work from row number 4 to row number 30. I hope you find it useful. Thanks for watching.